Good afternoon. Welcome to another episode of the Value Engineering Expert. Our goal, as many people know, is to lower CO2 in the built environment. We want to make this objective pervasive in society. And we believe that through featuring certain experts, today we have a very interesting guest. And my guest today is moving to the topic of energy. And we'll do a series of energy experts in the coming weeks. So my guest today is Arcadian Projects principal, owner, founder, Luke Shantz. And without further ado, can you let Luke into the podcast, sir?
Hey, how's it going?
Good. So my guest today again is Luke Shantz from Arcadian Projects. Luke's the founder, the president, and a friend of mine. We have similar backgrounds in the sense that years ago we were both at Sullivan Schultz, but that's where the connection reconnected later. And I kept in touch with Luke once I understood he was in solar. It was always a fascinating area that I found interesting, particularly after I started Footprint 4 years ago. So Luke, sounds like you're busy with your projects.
Yeah, it's been picking up drastically in the last year, and we've been making some transitions from supporting industrial manufacturing customers to moving back into some pretty heavy energy projects, which is always a promising sign. So,
yeah, no, I first of all, you got a great website, very easy to follow around, and it shows your attention to detail.
It's taken some time.
What's that?
It's taken some time to evolve over the years, that's for sure.
Yeah, I had a look at it, and I think today we'll focus on the need for alternate source of energy. We'll touch a little bit on the old dogs, like trying to get rid of propane, natural gas, coal, which is an insidious one. Nuclear, personally, I don't really like nuclear, although they're talking about these small generating nuclear stations, but they take a long time to come online. Did you ever work in nuclear with your multi-trade?
We did no nuclear work. Nope, steered clear of that. And even in my past life, I never did take the opportunity to go up and work at Bruce Power like some of my colleagues did. So
I like your neighborhood of Baden. It's near New Hamburg, and you're focusing today, from what I understand, on that Kitchener to London corridor, your multi-trade. Interesting that you're not international unions, you're CLAC. And do you find that an advantage, I guess, just from a jurisdictional standpoint, if nothing else, right?
Yeah, I mean, our past life is ICI unions. I mean, we I guess collaboratively, the guys, made that decision to go into CLAC just to, firm up the relationships and as we grow, having that stability there with some longer term contracts for our team members and hopefully some stability for employee retention and trades.
So today you run multi-trades and on the energy side, and also you do a fair bit of service work, right? You're working in unrelated solar multi-trade work. And so those trades go back and forth, I would imagine.
Yeah, it's a shared resource that we're able to do. We had to go down that road because the energy sector over the last 5 years in Ontario has been kind of a hit and miss and a bit of a roller coaster. So making that transition and being able to continue to grow our company, we focused on servicing other sectors and building that O&M and that the service side of our business, which has been good. So now both of them are very busy. So it's creating other challenges to keep everything going and labor resources.
So an interesting fact about Luke, he's actually got a Tesla. So tell us about your Tesla. Was that just a gift to your wife, or?
Well, it got to the end of things where she was tired of me telling her our next vehicle is going to be an EV, and that was probably 5 years ago. And after 400,000 kilometers on the old Honda Pilot, she decided it was time to finally go get the EV, and we've never looked back. It's awesome. We really enjoy it, and a lot of savings on the fuel side of things. So.
And you're a full millwright yourself, so. When's the last time you had a wrench in your hands? I imagine you go on once in a while and just grab the wrench off the guy to adjust something. Or
I enjoy working. I miss working. I have a shop at home where I get to tinker, but I do miss being out in the field and doing that. I probably my last project was about a year ago where I got to get out and do some heavy rigging and some structural reinforcing and stuff. I still really enjoy doing that and getting out in the tools and in the field. I don't get to do it very often anymore.
Yeah, a millwright, for many people who may not be aware, is one of the most versatile, skilled trades. I believe, you know, they weld, they do iron working, and they can do many things. So today, my understanding, looking at your website, but also talking to you in preparation for this, is 80% of your business is in the EV fast charging stations. The battery storage is very common for you to try and get something for your energy group, and then the solar voltaics, right?
Yeah, and it's been, you know, adding up a little bit more each year, and then over last year we got a lot of projects in the ground and working with each of those technologies on an individual basis. But what we're liking now is we're seeing these projects come together, and you know, coming together as a microgrid or to complement and help us deploy EV charging. It's going to be interesting to see where that technology goes. The storage along with the EV charging to create surge charging in areas where there's not the grid to support the heavy load that EV charging takes. And the solar is also there to complement the longer term slower charging more cost effectively, not always using the grid for charging. So it's going to be a real hybrid model that a lot of guys are working on right now. So
yes, so I saw the other day in the news that I think GM in Ingersoll is actually going to put some EV voltage or vehicles in there. Are you aware of that?
Yeah, there's a lot of the manufacturers. I've been saying this for quite a few years, and they've taken a little longer than I would have thought. But for them to get on the train, to get the long-term manufacturers that know how to build cars are finally on board, and things are going to happen quick. I think over the next 3 to 5 years, you're going to see a lot more vehicle options, and hopefully price point starts coming down as well. So
we're going to have a number of engineers listening, and then tradesmen. Typically, this thing's starting to get popular, this Engineering Experts podcast, which I'm doing weekly. But Luke, you've got a lot of knowledge, and today we might just cover broad trends. You know, if need be, we'll get you on again, maybe in 6 months or a year, and see how the trends have changed. But some of the things I wanted to talk about was, you know, things like the utilities, the local utilities around you, you know, KW Hydro, Waterloo, Energy Plus. They're pretty innovative compared to, let's say, Ontario Hydro, which you could almost say is an establishment that's hard to change, right? Ontario Hydro.
Yeah, Hydro One, they're a big conglomerate, right? And they cover a big chunk of our grid here in Ontario, and they carry a big stick, and they write a lot of the rules. So a lot of the smaller utilities are all interconnected with them and have to play nice and get along and make everything happen. So I mean, the smaller utilities, we're seeing a lot of movement on their side, creating non-regulated arms, which we've been encouraging for years for them to, you know, get involved with the new technologies coming and own them themselves and operate them, get them integrated into their grid where they need them. Because, you know, right now, a lot of the way it's happening is investment money's coming in, you know, first mover on the developers are trying to find a model to make it work, which is good to get the technology out there. But we've been encouraging the utilities to get involved and understand the technology and find ways of deploying it in their grid where they need it, where it can benefit them and the local communities, right? So, and I think that's when we'll start to see some scale build as the utilities get on board and get behind us.
The electric vehicle market, it's operating on DC, right? And then your battery storage operates on DC. And then you have to flip that with an inverter. We might want to carry some of these concepts through as an education thing right now. So your inverters, how's your cost of components doing? I mean, that must be a tough one.
Yeah, I mean, it's been a bit of a whirlwind last couple of years as you know, all raw material changes, are you know, just your base material and balance of system materials are changing drastically, and the prices are going up. Makes it difficult to, you know, bid these long-term jobs because the sales cycle on some of these jobs are 2 years, right? There's a lot of planning, a lot of paperwork and permitting with the hydro companies, engineering companies, making it work, bringing the customer and the host along on the journey where your connection point is. There's a lot of moving parts to integrating these systems. That's sort of our big challenge. But yeah, the price point and the lead times on the equipment has been a real challenge right now, just trying to have the hopper full of strategically planned out projects and scheduled accordingly, and trying to guess when the equipment's going to get there and what the price of it will be when it gets there.
So how would you compare quickly the trends in the US? Similar, or they're moving quicker?
Yeah, I mean, the US is really put a lot of effort into this over the last 5 years, and from my knowledge, anyways, and what I'm seeing is they're making regulatory changes quickly and to enable developers to deploy larger projects and integrate them. They also have a lot more ground to make up too, right? With a big part of their base load is still coal, and them working on that, they've got a lot of ground to make up. So it's in the right ratio. They are deploying some large projects on the solar side and the battery side, but it's still state by state and region by region. But I'm like what I'm seeing over there. They are really pushing hard to get projects deployed and be able to make the renewable energy generation available, and allowing private entities and developers to become generators to deploy electricity at what appears to be a lot less cost than what they're producing and deploying it for right now.
So this idea of a developer, you'd like to see, if there was one thing you'd like to see, is more enabling of the developer, which obviously could be a customer of yours, but the idea being that a Kitchener or a Waterloo, rather than just trying to do their own programs, could really benefit, and we in Ontario could benefit from having deregulation of this developer issue, right?
Yeah, I mean, they've been lobbying for a while, trying to figure out what that path looks like and how they write that scope. And it's a lot of historic ways of doing things and slow moving, trying to figure out how to make it, a more streamlined process and more cost effective process so that these projects can get deployed. There's a lot of red tape and a lot of hurdles right now that need to be removed or changed to enable the process to speed up quicker and get the technology out quicker.
Yeah, I find it a fascinating space, obviously, because I am driven to try and do something about climate change, which I think is, time is getting tight on that one. And certainly I regard you as a bit of an expert on this stuff. Can you explain a little bit what happens with this idea of a provincial peak, where, you get into a situation where, we can really pay high rates if we're in that spot where we don't have a solution, right? Where we would see rates just pop at the worst time, the hot day or the cold. Would it be more the air conditioning that brings that on?
Yeah, I mean, we're seeing the peaks, predominantly in the summer hot months, obviously, and that's where we're seeing the provincial peaks. And I don't know, for those of you who don't know how the peaks are calculated, basically it takes the five peak days of Ontario for the year, and they watch those throughout the year, and they know where their thresholds are and where their historic data is. So they watch and see when they feel that one of those hot days could potentially be a provincial peak, and they log those days, right? And then at the end of the year, it's a 1-year snapshot. They base, your peak demand factor for large manufacturers that are using a lot of power over a megawatt. You're automatically a Class A customer. Between 500 and a megawatt peak, some of them have the option of opting into being a Class A customer, which drastically drops their per kilowatt rate. But they're really paying attention because they're getting billed on how much power their facility used on those 5 days of those 5 peak days for Ontario. So that's how it's calculated on an annual basis for those large users. So they want to drastically reduce their consumption during those potential days. And there could be 15 to 30 potential plant or have an asset, a generator, a battery storage asset to help them come offline to drastically reduce their electricity consumption during those times, which saves them a lot when their rates, their peak demand factor is calculated for the following year. There's some substantial savings to be had there. I mean, $550,000 per megawatt, I believe, is the going rate of global adjustment right now. So,
well, that's a lot. Do you think that the diesel generator idea is that still has a place, right? To try and keep your batteries up to speed, or let's say not fall below the point of losing power? It seems wasteful that we're burning diesel, but
yeah, there's a lot of regulatories around that too. You're not really allowed to run your diesel for those situations. So I don't know a lot about the rules and regulations of that, but they really watch that. Your diesel generators are designed for backup power, and large facilities like data centers and stuff like that have mandatory large diesels in there for the backup power, but they're not typically allowed to run them for those peak days for peak shaving.
So then if you take something like the Mennonite community, they like to get off grid. You know, I think you're pretty close to, you probably know Mennonite people, being from Baden. Would you say that the Mennonites push the envelope a bit? Because they, to some extent, they don't want the wires, right? They don't want the wires coming in, and the devil's on the wires. I think that's the way I understand it. But they're good people. I mean, I've got some great Mennonite friends. The idea of deregulating Ontario Hydro would be something that would be a trend. What about technologies? What's the newest technology, in your opinion?
As far as the grid, and there's a couple questions I heard there as far as deregulating.
Yeah, I just want to learn more about the innovative side of solar, I suppose. Most people want to know, how do I get off grid as a house? You know, there's a lot of people that are worried about losing power. I mean, you know, with everything that's going on, you must see a big demand. You don't really focus residentially, but perhaps that's a big market, I would think.
Residential will be a big market. It's really gaining traction. Yeah, I mean, our grid resiliency here in Ontario has been so good for so long. It's something that's not always top of mind for people. You'd mentioned Mennonites there. You know, obviously they've been doing this for years, and they have their means of power with the diesel generators, and they're now integrating some solar to supplement that and be functionable. But they're pretty, you know, elite and specific usage for that. As far as, you know, homes and towns and cities and rural properties, I mean, there's off grid and then there's grid tied net metering, right? I mean, off grid, there's a lot of people that want to do off grid and think they want to do off grid, but I usually tell them it's you have to be prepared for that. It's a change of culture, it's a change of habits that you need to adopt and understand and be willing to do in order to have a reasonably designed system that will work well, and because the cost is quite extensive right now to integrate all these technologies and go completely off the grid for a large home, right? But there's good stepping stones along the way, and I think the start, what I usually tell you know, my clients is getting into net metering is kind of your first step. Buy that first asset, that's the solar system for your roof, put the panels on like you have on your home there, Martin, and you've started implementing some of these technologies on your system. But it's sort of a tiered approach. You get in that net metering and you're offsetting your consumption. So it starts that mindset of thinking about how much do I use and how much am I offsetting, and it gets you into that mindset, which is good. And basically you can design the system and live within your means to zero out your hydro bill from that one asset on your roof, the solar panels on your roof. Then the next step would be, okay, when it makes sense, you know, could I integrate battery storage so that, you know, for potential outages down the road, so I have some resiliency for my specific home too, is what a lot of people are looking at too. They want that resiliency and want to understand that. And we do get quite a few people that are asking for that. And we do integrated systems with both solar and battery. And so now you've got that initial asset you bought that can be used for net metering and spinning your meter backwards and offsetting your consumption. You're still tied to the grid, so you have that resiliency through this transition period. But then you'll go, you know, you've got the battery pack, so you've got some hours of autonomy. If the power were to go down, you know, that same solar system that's grid tied, the new smart inverters can switch over and use that solar system to charge those batteries during that period of time. It's a little tricky to tie all in together, and as our grid changes, it'll make, you know, might make more sense in other areas than you know, urban settings or whatever. But I think you're going to start to see people thinking along those lines. That's step two. Step three would be, okay, I understand this. I know how much my batteries store. Hey, I can put a few more batteries in, get some more hours of autonomy. I understand how my solar works. Now the nice thing about doing that intermediate step is you can turn your main breaker off and you can practice living off grid. Let's see how long I can function in, you know, shoulder seasons or in the summer, and you can actually experiment with it and use it before you actually go off grid. So you always have the grid there as your resiliency. So it's a bit of a tiered process, and you're spending some capital along the way on these individual assets when it makes sense, and integrating when it makes sense, and learning and bringing yourself, your family, and everybody along on this journey. Eventually you get to the point where some people will just be, I can live without this. I don't need to be tied to the grid. I've got mixed feelings both ways on that. I mean, the grid's necessary for integrating and deploying all the new renewable technologies, but just gives you a bit of a process of how some people are looking at it and what works. But there's lots of hybrid solutions and hybrid models for individuals.
I was surprised, little things, that the clothes dryer is very intense. Like, that appliance is very intense, but yet, you want to have your freezers work when the grid goes down. Maybe you don't care about air conditioning quite the same way. Open the windows and hang a clothesline out. We could save a lot of power if people didn't just put their clothes in a clothes dryer, from what I understand.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I have an app on my phone, and I can share a little more detail on you. I've started monitoring my home, and more people are asking about, hey, so this is a sort of, a basic technology you can put on your service panel that shows you every appliance in your house, and it picks up the sine waves, and it's pre-programmed to find the clothes dryer, the microwave, all the motors and high users in your house, even your garage doors, everything. It takes some time, but it figures it out. So I've learned a lot in the last 6 months watching this and seeing, where am I using my power? What do I need? What don't I need? What are my high users? So I'll share a little bit more with you on that and show you what device I'm using. But it's interesting to educate yourself, your family, and get your head wrapped around the power usage that you do, right?
Yeah, that's quite interesting and quite practical. I'd be interested in that. Your industry certainly has a lot of acronyms. So I'm going to bring one up here, and I'll let you expand on it. Virtual net metering. Virtual net metering. How would you describe that for our listeners? Virtual net metering. Virtual net metering is I've been talking about it for like the last 5 years, saying it's coming soon. They wrote it in the long-term energy plan 2 years ago. It got removed from the long-term energy plan, which was really disheartening. Virtual net metering is basically allowing multiple properties to aggregate, multiple buildings and properties to put solar on and offset a load, offset a specific property, feedback onto the grid. But basically you can create a portfolio of projects. Cities look at it. We're working with a couple of cities and regions right now that want to use their city-owned facilities, arenas, large buildings that they own anyways. They want to be able to do this. They want to be able to cover those facilities and feed back into their grid. They team up with the local utility, and they work out a way to do it. They connect it, and they can feed from multiple properties across the city, feed into the hydro grid, and be able to show a cost savings to their community. So it's very interesting. Once virtual net metering starts to open up, you'll see a big surge here in Ontario if we can get there. Farmers would be very interested in it. A lot of farmers own multiple farms all over the place. They want to be able to put renewable assets out there on their farms and on their barns. They have all this roof space, and then they can deploy back into the grid. They can do arbitrage. They can bid into the electricity market. If they're large enough, they can sign up as a generator and sell power back into the grid. But it's basically assets that can be deployed, abroad under one portfolio, under one entity that can offset consumption in another location. And that's where it needs to get to. Okay, I get it. So then I could even do it with a few farms, perhaps, right? Where I'm the ratepayer. So you end up with some kind of a permitted permission and monitoring on and off. Because the FIT program, if you remember our friend, what was his name? McGinty? Remember McGinty? He got into a lot of trouble for that, but that was just too rich, right? Correct. I mean, that level of a FIT program, although I have one on my one farm, and it pays quite well till 2026. Yeah, I mean, it needed to be done. There was kind of, in my opinion, it was a race to the starting gate. Ontario wanted to take the initiative and get a feed-in tariff program going, like they modeled it after Germany, that had been going for 15, 20 years before ours. It was a good thing. They needed to do something to draw in the technologies, draw in the investors, draw in and make it, just make it easy to get your hands on and be able to do it. So the intent was right. In my opinion, it either took too long to get the structure set up, so the rates were way too high.
So which really shortened up the lifespan of the feed and tariff program. They could have probably deployed the rates at half and still gotten just as good of uptake. And what it would have done is maybe kept some of the developers out of the game because the rates were so lucrative. Investors jumped on it quickly and quickly found some loopholes and were able to aggregate projects together and create large portfolios with as high dollar per kilowatt that the government was offering for that period of time. There was such a big uptake that they couldn't even keep up with reducing the rates because equipment prices kept falling drastically. And the uptake of the program was so fast that they struggled to even keep the rates where they needed to be. So it was a bit of a schmozzle. At the end of the day, I give them credit for getting it out there and getting that industry in here and drawing in some manufacturing and trying to do the right thing. But it obviously can things like that can always be managed a little bit better. And there was the program should have lasted a lot longer than what it did.
Yeah, no, that's very good. Maybe you should be a politician. You'd be good at it. You seem to have a good, calm way of presenting ideas. So we talked a little bit about provincial peak and the idea of virtual net metering, which is, I think, really useful. Have you ever thought about doing your own engineering within the Arcadian group?
We have spent some time considering it. I mean, we work with a lot of really good engineering firms, and with the new technologies coming out, it sometimes takes time for those firms to kind of get on board and get their buy-in and understand it. It's been a bit of a journey. We've lucked out. We've got some really good engineering partners that we lean on for specifically projects we're doing. But we have considered that as having somebody in-house to have a little more control of the schedule and stuff like that would be nice. But right now we work with our partners and it works both ways. They see opportunities that they can feed our way. They know what our capabilities are and our resources are. So we find our niche projects through them, and vice versa. We feed good opportunities to them when it makes sense. So
yeah, no, that's always a question of whether you lose leads or upset your partners. But I found when we did our own in-house engineering, eventually it was beneficial because our engineers could actually explain something to their engineers, and sometimes you could get them over the line. Or if one engineer has never done it before, he doesn't want to stamp it, but yet he'll take a design build approach and maybe allow that stamp if it's somebody and you can hire some pretty practical engineers.
We do have a team here on the design side that works very closely with the engineers. So they've been with me for 10 years and they bring a lot of experience. They've seen a lot of technologies and integration. So they work with the engineering. So we do a lot of value engineering with our partners because we can do a lot of the legwork up front, the product specing and all of that, and help them get the right equipment spec and a simplified way of connecting it. And I think that's what really works well, is using our on-site experience and experience with the equipment and the technologies to make that engineering design the simplest. Because a lot of times on the electrical side, there's a lot of ways you can do it, and one way could be double the cost of the other way. You see it in civil as well.
Yeah, no, that would be your value add for sure. I would definitely invite you to the table of a value engineering session yourself or one of your team members. That would make a lot of sense because, it's all about saving cost and schedule. And invariably, if you do it right, you save cost and schedule, right? I mean, if it's something that costs more, takes more time to wire, right?
Yeah.
And then let alone the equipment waste. I noticed that you talked about air source heat pumps, like the air to air. Have you been involved with air to air? Because that technology is quite fascinating. I don't know if you know Brian Pesco. He's with Panasonic and he's doing a lot of that air to air, that 1-2 ton size. And it looks quite exciting for a solar partnership. I think I even had an interesting lead that I was going to give you the other day, and I just don't think we had opportunity. I think it might have been maybe a reason why I got talking about coming on the podcast, because clearly solar, hooking up with an equipment guy like that, you really can turnkey something for a developer, right? You can go in there, ESA can be involved, all that, right?
The technology definitely works well together. We do a lot of work with geo companies. We formed some really good relationships with geo partners. and air source heat pump technology, because that's a lot of the new, initiatives. The GHG reduction and stuff is trying to get people to buy into considering the air source heat pump or the ground source heat pump technology and electrifying. We can offset electricity. We can offset the additional electricity costs of a geopump or an air source pump, but we can't offset propane. We can't offset natural gas. It's done. So that's why they work really well together. So when our geo partner goes in and has a progressive customer that understands their technology and wants to do this, they're very quick to follow up. Well, yeah, there will be some increased electricity loads here, but there's a very simple way of doing it. And then they bring us into the discussion and we work together on, well, you're adding this load, here's how we offset that load. In some cases, we can offset the entire facility. Even in a large manufacturing plant, we can do quite a bit with reducing their load. So yeah, it's been interesting discussions. And even on the residential level, we see the same thing, people switching over. I just did my house, switched it over to geothermal last year from propane. What a difference. And now I'm going to run for 6 months and see what my loads are. And then I'll design the net metering system specifically to offset my entire property. But I wanted to get my EV charger hooked up and my geothermal hooked up before that.
Yeah, that's very good. I'm impressed. I have a geothermal patent that's quite interesting. Drilled shaft. There's drill rigs in every city. And we're certainly interested in partnering with other geothermal suppliers, with the return on energy, let's say in high water ground of 4, perhaps, high water tables, and then, might get as low as 2 or 3 on dry ground. So I have an interesting one, which I won't get into trying to sell here today. I'd be more interested to hear who you partner with on the geothermal side. Like, who do you recommend that can handle a condominium building? I mean, it has to be a substantial mechanical guy, right?
Yep. And the projects we've done have been with Buchanan and Hall to Stratford. They've been in geothermal for a really long time, and they've started expanding their client base as well and doing more commercial and larger scale projects. They've been good to work with, and they're local, so we have a good relationship with them. That's who we've had success with. But
yeah, Rose is quite sharp, right?
Yeah, they're good. They're good people to work with, and then we've built solar on their building, and actually we're in the process right now of expanding solar on their building because they're bringing more load to their building. So they have a net metering on their headquarters in Stratford, which we built probably 4 years ago or so. Now they're expanding their building and growing their services, so they want to make sure that they stay net zero. So they have no gas there. They're running a net zero facility. They want to stay net zero, so we're actually looking at expanding their system for them right now.
That's a really good example, actually. They're a good company, and they're living their values, right? Which I think you have those values as well in terms of not only value engineering, but safety and the things that matter to people. I asked Luke, what legacy? I would ask you, Luke, two questions. Who would you say were your best mentors? Like, give me 1 or 2 mentors. Would it go back to being the millwright guy? Or would it be just what made you get into this solar thing?
A lot of it was timing. I did have some great mentors coming through the trades and the people that I met that I reflect back on now. I didn't see it at the time necessarily, but I look back now and I can pick 3 or 4 pivotal people that encouraged me to push forward and put more on my plate than I should have ever had, and challenged me and stretched me and grew me without me even knowing it, right? And pushed me in a direction that maybe I would have never pushed myself, but they seen something in the way we do things with our teams, and they pushed me pretty hard. But they were also the first ones to haul me in, close the door, and tune me up when I got a little sideways here and there. And I have a lot of respect for those people that took the time, invested time in me to haul me in and do that and set me straight and point me in the right direction and watch me and guide me along the way. I had a lot of really good managers that did that. I have a lot of respect for them now. So
yeah, I commented about an engineer, Nader, who's one of my best friends in terms of the industry that I'm in, the civil, but we have 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, right? So
I use that line all the time.
If you can sit down and listen as an apprentice, you would tell a young guy, just listen, right? Try to drop the tendency to talk too much. And if you listen, and think about it that night. We wake up the next day and somehow it sinks in, right? Because
I had pretty strong, support with my family too, right? Being in the trades. My father was in the trades his whole life. My uncle, they're both farmers. We grew up on the farm as a kid. I really contribute a lot of where we are today as a team and as a company to our values and where we came from and how we got our start. I don't take that for granted for sure, and I still rely on them to help coach and work with me. So
yeah, I know you have a strong family values and a great wife as well. What about business mentors? Who do you go to now when you're not sure of things? When you want to kind of knock the ceiling, and whether it be financing, like who do you bank with? I'm always interested in these questions.
well,
Banks. Yeah.
we've been with RBC since we started, and they've been a strong supporter of ours and helped us get to where we are. So, but as far as there's so many that you kind of reach out to and gravitate to. I've used and worked with ex CFOs from the large multi-trade companies that I worked with. That sort of we had that connection that have come around in my next life in the energy field and with Arcadian, that have gotten in my corner and kind of helped guide me through partnership buyouts, acquisitions. I really am. I have a strong group that got us off the ground. Oakbridge Properties, Oakbridge Holdings out of Kitchener. They took a shining to us and brought us in as kind of a startup, and brought us in those first few years and gave us the accounting support, admin support, guidance, business models, and really got us down the straight and narrow in those first few early years that my partner and we could just focus on selling and building. And that was a huge lift for us. And I still go back to them to this day. They're awesome. They really appreciate where we've come from. They understand where we came from, and they know they had a big part in getting us down that road. So I still keep in touch with all of them today.
Yeah, no, I remember you telling me those stories years ago. What about where would you like to see Arcadian? Where do you think you can go with this? Like, you've got 50 people, right? You seem to have a pretty diversified, well-organized group. Does it keep getting bigger because you're on the curve? You're on the right thing? It would seem to be true.
Yeah, I mean, size-wise, staff-wise, and team members, I mean, we've been about the same for quite a while. But I found that when we were really doing the boom of the solar, when it was going, we had a lot of laborers and our own mechanical teams that were more boots on the ground building. Now we're more skilled trades, specialty technicians. We've just sort of switched our lineup a little bit through these acquisitions as well, bringing on some good local experienced tradespeople on the mechanical and the electrical side. So we sort of shifted that. We're still running that same team, but we're very strategic in where those resources are spent. And the last couple of years has been a good eye opener, is to really evaluate, where does this elite team, where are we best utilized, and what industry it is, and where do we get the biggest gains in deploying new products and helping out with the GHG reduction and the initiatives that need to happen for climate change. And I've really spent some time. We have this small group of really good resources. Where should we be using them? Who should we be working for? Who should we be partnering with? And it's a constant evolving thought process of putting some effort into that, right?
Certainly the goal of net zero is one we all should embrace. And just in terms of a building, you almost need to have a large roof, not too tall a building, would you say? I'm trying to get to the heart of what's possible today. I know that geothermal is being done in the basements of P4s and P5s in Toronto. Takes a while for them to do a hole, because usually they do it after the fact. But I have an interesting geothermal that can be done before the ramps are out. And then also, I'm very interested in partnering with geothermal firms. So who do you recommend? Who do you have? Is it the mechanical guy who does the system that dominates that recommendation, or is it the driller? Because I think the mechanical guy basically hires the driller, right?
You're talking for larger commercial projects, multi-res projects, towers, that type of stuff?
Yeah, like light industrial would be something that there's no reason why you take something like Toyota that they couldn't be a roof full of solar, right? and with geothermal.
Yeah, it becomes complicated with on the solar side and the energy side because of the roofs on manufacturing plants are very busy, right? You've got their paint shop stacks, you've got a lot of equipment on the roofs of some of these buildings the way they were designed back then. We're seeing a lot of changes in the new designs of being conscious about roof space and capacity, being able to have provisions for solar coming up. So that's a good thing. We're seeing solar hard spec in a lot of commercial buildings and, strip malls and stuff like that. New buildings that are going up, they're writing it right into the spec out of the gate, which is super encouraging to see that finally hitting the road, right? Because it's a pretty small percentage of the project costs at the end of the day, if you're doing it in the upfront base building, right, in the envelope. As far as partners on the geothermal side, I'm not really familiar with the large scale geo like what you're talking about, like what you've been involved with. It's kind of out of our realm. We don't do a lot of that on the larger scale. I see it happening. We've been involved with a pilot project that's sort of a mini scale of what you're talking about. We did in Waterloo, where we did piles. We came in as the mechanical partner and did the piping and the hookup and the testing and getting that system online and commissioning it. So that was kind of cool. I'd be interested to go back and see where the results are with some of the stuff they were doing, but that was pretty small scale compared to what you're talking about.
Yeah, I always found being a pile guy that that there was always too much discussion over trying to occupy the pile space. Patrick Birmingham years ago did piles in Burlington Bay, and he was a really progressive guy. But people look at that and say, oh, what's going to happen to the temperature and expansion coefficients, the steel, and the kind of irrelevant questions, but it used to bog down that. So my belief is the geothermal should be separate from the pile. We should have designed piles to be efficient, not strictly pipes full of water.
Well, I think you open yourself up to a broader range of mechanical partners coming on. If that's sort of isolated and separated, it's very specialty, the large projects you're talking about. So if you have a good pile company that understands the pile technology, it's sort of completely separate from the mechanical piece where you're hooking up the pumps and the hoses and making it work, right? So
you're not going to get the innovation there or the cooperation from the pile guy. He can do something with concrete cheaper than with steel, but yet, to do geothermal, you almost need to have round steel, which is a higher footprint element. And there's low vibration requirements in cities and whatnot. But most of the thing we should go after is trying to make these buildings do as best they can in the future of GTA. That's where I can see a lot of things I can help with. And I think Buchanan and Hall actually was, to go back to them, they do air to air with Panasonic. Actually, they can supply those. That's and I wanted to try a couple up north. I got a place up north, and I thought that'd be efficient with solar up there because the rock is shallow and wind also. I'm experimenting with wind. Wind is an interesting one. Windmills. We actually have one that we're putting in that's not patented, but I'm going to do one on this building here. I'm in Godrich and doing this podcast. And we're going to do a 30 horsepower high pole magnet design where we machine the rotors of the motor, and then we can create at 10 or 12 kilometers an hour, we can create a generator. And that we can get 10 kilowatt. So then feeding into batteries, right? You'll have to come by.
I would love to check that out.
I want to
small winds. Small wind's been very difficult in our region, and there's not a lot of products out there. We've been kind of on the hunt for a good small wind product for all the ag customers, and it's definitely a very feasible way of doing net metering and off grid.
Yeah, I'd be happy. I've got a couple of, I got the 15 horse motors machined with 600-pound high pole magnets, and they're 5 horsepower or 5 kilowatt. And then I have 2 30s, and I'm going to use at least one of them on this building in the coming weeks, actually, beside a geothermal. And the geothermal I'm putting in is a 48-inch steel liner, and then a 16-inch inner closed water furnace. And then I grout those two together, and I actually create a a pressure and I create a high water table. It's fascinating, really. The whole thing is because I can combine what I know about piles into something reasonably economic. But if you want to get I actually have some extra, we'll make a deal right now on the show here, but I have extra 16-inch pipe and I have a 15-horse motor. So if you wanted to put a 20-foot pole in, I don't think we need a permit, maybe ESA, right? That'd be about it.
One way to find out, just go and smack it up and someone will come by and tell you, right? I've got a couple of hosts that would be very interested in testing it out and putting the technology up for sure. So
yeah, I think wind is the way to go. I mean, you have a lot of windy areas. A farm has always got more than enough wind, and that doesn't cost any fuel. Yet these people think of windmills as this FIT program we went through with the big windmills that Central Huron never allowed them. But you're more than familiar, I think, with all the ones that went on down in and around Godrich and down along Lake Huron. So they're big, and there's been questions about the life of those things and the amount of concrete that goes in the bases of those things. Really, I don't see it as having been a very successful thing. But the small windmill, getting something like your place or your farm off grid, and the wind is free. So whereas you got to do something other than just solar all the time. Chad, the fellow I work with, Windworks and Solar, Chad Armstrong, I told you about him the other day. He's quite bright and actually has a millwright background. And for him, wind is the solution in the winter and not so much in the summer. Like he's in his heyday now with the solar, as you would be. But I like the idea of having both and getting away from the generator and the diesel and trying to be smart, like maybe just use less power. Right? Like,
we're seeing it. We're doing a system right now, a pilot system, microgrid that's going up to the Arctic. We're building a couple of them for research labs, and so it's nice to be able to play with that technology where we have 2 small turbines, we've got a solar bank, we've got lithium ion battery storage, we've got everything kind of all together in a condensed modular building that's going to be able to go up on the frozen tundra and be a research lab. People can live in it. It's fully functionable, and it's a true microgrid, right? So it's nice to be able to get your hands on that technology on a smaller scale and figure out some of the challenges and issues with it, and we can take that knowledge to the larger projects and eventually to the ag industry and other industries. I mean, these small mobile microgrids can be used in the mining industry, all kinds of different aspects, remote communities where they just way too costly to bring in infrastructure for power, right? There's a lot of opportunities for these small microgrids, and then on the large side, there's the utility side. They're working on it in parallel, and I think that we're going to see some big, big changes to the grid integration and how microgrids are being used.
So microgrid is a private entity that's able to get like a mine off. They basically have to deal with it because they're not going to run transmission lines into their place. Is that?
Yeah, I mean, it's a pretty broad term, but I mean, ideally, you can take a specific building off a line, right? It's off grid, but a microgrid is basically being able to have all the components of the different technologies. You have the resiliency of having both solar and wind. You probably have a generator designed into it as well for resiliency because of our shoulder seasons and our winters, right? So it's all the components and technologies pulled into one. You'll have some storage as well. So that's the interesting part for us when we're talking microgrids, is on the smaller scale.
Are you doing modular small stuff? I remember initially Todd's one of your partners, right?
Yep.
I really like Todd. Say hi to him, by the way. But you got out of that but you're still maybe going to play. If somebody pays you, you'll help them with assembling something like that.
Yeah, I mean, we have a lot of experience on the modular side, whether it's inverter buildings for large solar farms like Todd and his team were doing with that group over the years. We supported them through that whole phase of their manufacturing of the modular buildings. Arcadian worked with him as a trades partner. So between our trades team and his design and management team, we have a lot of experience in modular. we took that experience and we did a bunch of battery buildings and helped a couple battery companies get off the ground with their modular designs that are now being deployed all over the place. So we did a lot of pilots for them. We did, a 12 megawatt lithium system down in Mexico where there's no grid to run the Kia auto plant. We did several projects in New York. We did, a bunch of different projects with them, helping them figure out their modular technology. And now we see that transitioning, and there's an opportunity for microgrids to be able to modulize and have that, using that same experience to make the modular microgrids.
Yeah, I've always been interested in small buildings. I created Monster Minis, which was a startup in the Canadian mini storage company, and metal buildings, but I think those wouldn't necessarily be liftable. The first pass, people would think, oh, get a container, but you can't ship a container, right? So you're talking about like panel systems. What kind of panel systems do you like that have a floor that's reasonably light but load bearing? Is there a name that you can drop for the benefit of our viewers, help one of your partners? Is there a system? They usually...
Right now, you're talking on the modular side. Most of the things we're doing
modular side, yeah,
are we were doing a lot of custom with freezer panels, like custom freezer panels, because we could build the skids whatever size. So we would build them with a large I-beam steel structure that we could put components in the floor and stuff as well, and running all your cable management in the floor. Then we would build the system. Basically, your logistics would design how you wanted your system. So we build them 60 feet long and 12 feet wide because we can truck them. And that sort of becomes your staple base design. And then you use that design. But as far as flooring and stuff like that, it was pretty standard stuff, but built out of freezer panels with heavy, large structural frames that can be lifted. Like the ones we did in Mexico, they were 90,000 pounds when they were done. A 60 by 12 climate controlled fire suppression building that could be lifted and set in place.
Yeah, well, it's amazing. Do you ever, when you really look at your career, you're quite the expert, and I appreciate you coming on the show. Is there any questions or any direction you'd like to take the last 5 or 10 minutes? I think we've covered a lot, and I really appreciate some of your insights. And that modular building things and the net metering, the microgrid, you call it a microgrid. There's a lot of acronyms in your business, I think.
Well, DER is one that I refer to a lot. You'll see that in some of my posts and stuff is DER solutions, right? It's a distributed energy resource solution, and that can be anything, right? It can be a generator, it can be a solar system, it could be wind, just wherever you can remotely put the generation where the load is. And that's the whole end game of all of this distributed generation, is putting the generation where the load is, so that you're alleviating stress on the grid and capacity on the grid from such far transmissions, right? We have one thing we touched a little bit on is the air source heat pumps. We talked about the small 1 and 2 ton units that they're trying to work into the multi-res space, right? And getting rid of the gas-fired PTACs that they use now. They're very inefficient, so they are making some headway on that. We've got a product that we've been working with for the last year that takes it to the commercial level. So I'd be interested in sharing a little bit about that with you. I haven't done that, but it will take it to the next level for long-term care facilities that now have new requirements for fresh air quality, and cooling now has all been mandated. So that whole industry has really been shaking up. So this new technology is going to prove to be very useful in these facilities, and not designing to the old design, or putting a big expensive chiller in there or boilers in there, trying to look at this through another set of lenses. So that's been something interesting we've been working on the air source heat pump side. Talking a little bit just about multi-res, that seems to be a big hurdle for a lot of these technologies, right? So we're building more and more affordable housing. We have a lot of people to house. We have a lot of people coming in to our country. That's what we see a lot of these expansions going. The tricky part with everything that we're talking about on the energy side, we're talking about houses and detached homes and rural properties and farmers. That's one thing for those people to be able to integrate these technologies. Where it gets really complicated is multi-res, high rise, low rise. How do we, EV chargers is a perfect example. You build a nice, 300 unit multi-res in town. People buy into it. They want it, whether it's condos or rentals. Well, the first thing they want is they want EV chargers to charge their vehicle. Well, power wasn't designed for that, right? So there's no way the service size is big enough for them to be able to have even 10 EV chargers is ridiculous. So we're getting a lot of calls for that. How do we solve that? And the other problem that those places have is they don't have any rooftop space. Very, very, very small footprint. So they don't have any room to put renewable generation on site. It's usually a very small footprint. Maybe you could work a carport in to get some solar. You can't do wind. Battery storage has to be very strategically done. So the multi-residential and those types of buildings is going to be a big challenge for the energy industry, because that's where all people are. They all want to have this, but how do you enable that property and that facility to be able to handle the load that renewables needs going in and out? The infrastructure required is pretty heavy duty. So that's going to be interesting how we resolve that. But there's ways that are coming, and I can talk a little bit more about it at a later date. But that's where bringing the microgrid in, using batteries with your EV chargers, with solar, all becomes a unit, so that you can surcharge the vehicles when needed, and using the existing service size to slowly charge that battery over time. It's going to be an interesting model to figure out. So, but we're working on some pretty cool pilot projects with some forward-thinking developers that we're pretty excited about. So,
yeah, well, let me know anything I can do to help that. That's a great space, is when you start involving the proper roof size, geothermal, and then I think we got to get out of the city. Land's expensive, and you can't do the 25 or 40-story building, but you can do a 5-story building of let's say a half an acre, right? Something like that, where you're able to make small condo units, probably good quality of life. You can even get people to use the damn stairs for a change, right?
Yep.
The way it used to be. Well, they used to call them brownstones in New York, I think. I haven't been to the States for a long time. But I used to go all the time, and these cities just keep getting bigger. It's amazing in Toronto, there's 100 tower cranes in downtown. There's more tower cranes in Toronto than LA, Chicago, and New York combined. So
that's crazy.
It is kind of crazy, but we're trying to change what we can, Luke, and I can see you're doing the same thing, and I'm gonna thank you again for coming on, and let's do this again, because you just got my curiosity up. So I want to learn, right? And one of the things I was very good at is learning, asking questions and trying to learn. I mean, you would probably have to say that hours are a factor. Like if you look back on your career, how you put a lot of 60-hour weeks in, I'm sure, right?
Yep, there's no doubt about that. My wife has those carefully calculated. I'm sure she's been a very strong supporter of our journey, my previous career and this business. She has a very strong supporter. She's my rock, and my girls are at home too. They see what we're trying to do, and it's nice now having some teenagers. They're getting it. They're asking a lot more questions. They understand a little better why we're doing this and what we're trying to do, and it's been great having them in my corner and supporting and being involved. So. What about your kids? What's a passing word for your kids? You got a couple kids? Yeah. Two girls, 17 and 14. Are they technical? They're not in the trades. They're not. Yeah, my daughter. My oldest, Kira. She's got a lot of passion. She is got a lot of energy. She has her own business. She has a cleaning business. She has about 30 clients that she started up through COVID, and she's kept that going. So it's fun watching her grow and develop and go through this startup phase of a small business and listening to her challenges. It's been fun, her and I battering back and forth, but it's been great watching them dig in and figure their path out. And my youngest too is got a lot of energy and different set of skill sets. It's just really cool seeing them develop and get into and listening, and you don't realize how close attention they pay to you. Like they spend with you, right? Of the time and what they pick up over the years. That time with them when they're young is really precious, and you want to make sure you use it. Yeah, no, I like to hear you talk that way. You're obviously a good father, and
one of my favorite trademarks is earth honoring systems. And I heard Paul Ehrlicher, a famous Harvard professor, referred to the fact we need more earth honoring systems. Like clearly things are somewhat out of control. And so I trademarked that the next day. And so really, I thank you for contributing to earth honoring systems in your own world. And trademarks aren't really worth the money, but unless they're attached to a patent. But we're interested in helping guys like you develop. I learned a lot about patents, and you might actually find, Luke, that you have some ideas that are patentable. I'm actually I think playing in a week, because you're 2 weeks out before you'll hit the Thursday podcast, is my patent agent and lawyer, Ashley Burke, and she's very, very good, very bright. And so we got some interesting guests, and I thank you for being on the Experts podcast, and I hope you get some business out of it. But I know for a fact that I'll probably bug you more than I used to.
Well, I sure appreciate you giving me the opportunity to chat about what I'm passionate about and working with you. And you've been a mentor as well. We've known each other for, I can't even remember when the first time we met. It's got to be at least 6 or 7 years that we've been back and forth strategizing on the different markets and the industries. It's been fun. So.
Yeah, it's nice to see it come together a bit for footprint engineering and the people that are associated. Our concept is to have a lot of guys like you, maybe add 1,000 years of experience on the bench, and have those people win. Doesn't mean they're billable to me, but it can mean that you can call me anytime, and chances are I'll know somebody that can help you. Anyway, take care. Thanks again.
Thank you.